On my podcast on Sunday, we spoke at length about the intellectual chutes and ladders many media outlets will navigate in the aftermath of an unambiguous Islamic terror attack. Not only did this Manhattan truck attack have nothing to do with Islam.
What you're seeing is not Islam whatsoever. None of this is condoned, including the, sacrificing and getting yourself killed at the end of a terrorist attack. None of that is Islamic. It's anti-Islamic.
But even in the early hours immediately after the attack, we must all remain vigilant against the hypothetical forthcoming Islamophobia. Even when the Muslims quoted in this piece say they aren't primarily worried about that, and their priority is helping attack victims. Simultaneously, we've seen mass shooting events. Of course, last month in Las Vegas, this past weekend in Sutherland Springs, Texas, perpetrated by, as of now, ambiguously motivated white men, whose race and gender can, for some reason, fairly be considered factors in the violence by mass media. A CNN piece notes that Vegas was the consequence of silently accepting the rage of white men. America has a white man problem, says Salon. The Chicago Tribune laments that all across America, white men are becoming actual violent animals. Somehow the former screeching of Aid Skrillex, "You're fucking a white male!" has become the current headline of the mainstream journalists. And all the while I'm wondering why the same media that coddles Islam from hypothetical Islamophobic backlash won't coddle white men from the documented backlash in the aftermath of these incidents of violence that are, of course, nothing but perversions of a great race and gender of peace. It's nothing but systemic white male phobia. I guess the established terms are Blancophobia and androphobia, so maybe to be technical we should go with Blanco-androphobia. Or as one listener suggested, maybe just cockphobia. Wow, that was crap. But whatever you want to call it, I'm not trying to be tribal here. All I want is consistency. Either it's okay to judge the group of the killer, or it's not. And I think you can make a case for either, but you need to pick one. And it's especially weird to me that these pundits will stop at nothing to disconnect Islam from an explicitly Islamic attack, but will readily connect race and gender to other attacks where there's nothing to suggest those factors played any motivational role. But at bare minimum, just pick one. It's either okay to judge the group by the individual or the individual by the group, or it's not. But what these arguments lack in principle and consistency, they make up for in also lacking evidence, or at least interpretational competence with the evidence, as demonstrated by Newsweek, which tweeted Monday morning that white men have committed more mass shootings than any other group, linking an early October article they published the day after the Las Vegas shooting, within which our author writes, "Statistics show that since 1982, the majority of mass shootings, 54%, were committed by white men, according to data from Mother Jones. Black people were the second largest perpetrators of mass shootings based on ethnic background, but only accounted for roughly 16% of the total incidents during that time period." The data referenced as mentioned are from Mother Jones, which published an itemized list of mass shooting events in the United States, which they define as indiscriminate rampages in public places, resulting in 4 or more victims killed, excluding shootings stemming from more conventional crimes such as armed robbery or gang violence. No analytical reason provided for that distinction, though I suspect it has less to do with analytical integrity and more to do with manufacturing convenient support for a pre-existing narrative. Regardless, I'll give Mother Jones the benefit of the doubt there, and for the purposes of this exercise, I'll assume that their dataset is both comprehensive and accurate, that this is a correct and complete list of all the mass shootings in the United States since 1982. Newsweek's analysis of these data, as is anyone's analysis who says that white men are responsible for the most mass shootings in this country, is only as useful as saying white people are the largest racial demographic in this country. According to the shootings data Mother Jones compiled, all but 2 of the shootings were perpetrated by men, making sex a virtually meaningless variable in this analysis. We observe variability in the races of the perpetrators. As the headline says, most of them, 56%, are white, 17% are black, 7% are Asian, another 7% are Latino, and there are a few outliers as well. The key analytical question is, given the racial breakdown of the US population generally, what would we expect the distribution of these shootings data to look like? The shootings data span 35 years, so I'll just use 2010 census data as a generalized reference point for America's racial breakdown. If mass shootings, as Mother Jones defines them, occurred at a rate proportional to American racial demographics, we'd expect white shooters to commit 69% of the offenses. We'd expect only 12% from black shooters, only 3% from Asian shooters, and so forth. But we don't see that. We see a white population percentage that's larger than the white share of mass shooters. So while it is true that white people commit most of the mass shootings as our authors have defined them, it's actually less than what we should expect given the demographic majority that white people hold in this country. And accordingly, minority races outside of Latinos are actually doing more mass shootings than we should expect given population racial demographics. And so using their own data, Newsweek's claim that white men are doing most of the mass shootings is the analytical equivalent to saying white men are doing most of the existing. These statistics aren't meaningful unless we adjust for population, and when we do, we can see that white people are actually underrepresented. But never let the facts get in the way of a good narrative. And it's not enough just to have a bunk conclusion. You gotta prop it up with bunk reasoning too. This article pushes the faulty premise that white men do the most mass shootings as true, and then goes through leaps and bounds to explain that incomplete analysis, all while avoiding the obvious explanation that there are just more white men. No, perhaps it's something related to mental illness in white men, or perhaps it's other research that suggests white men commit mass shootings out of a sense of entitlement. There's a feeling of entitlement that white men have that black men don't, says one criminologist. They often complain that their job was taken by blacks or Mexicans or Jews. They feel that a well-paid job is their birthright, and it's a blow to their psyche when they lose that. Even though there is absolutely no evidence to suggest such factors played any role in the cases they're applying this article to, Las Vegas and Sutherland Springs, but others say it's hard to point to any single factor in terms of why white men have committed most mass shootings. Well, others are wrong based on your data. It's not at all hard. There are more white men, therefore white men do the most of a lot of things. There are pieces of the puzzle and you put them all on a jigsaw board and you're still going to have a big hole there. What I do know is that violent behavior, whether it's serious violence or minor violence in populations, is never just one thing. It's not a one thing problem. It's going to be an accumulation of things, kind of a whole cocktail of factors, said one psychiatry and behavioral sciences professor. And that's probably true in analyzing why an individual commits a certain act. But that's not what we're doing here. If there are more people to commit a certain act, that act will be committed more frequently. That's just a basic truth. And this article finally admits it in the very last paragraph. After navigating an obstacle course of incoherence, this article closes. The high number of white men committing mass shootings is also explained, at least in part, by the fact that white people make up a majority of the US population, 63%, and by the way, that's a current estimate that's historically low. Their shooting data go all the way back to 1982, and yet they're using only current racial demographic data here, which isn't particularly honest. And men are more likely to commit violent crime in general. In the US, 98% of mass shootings and 90% of all murders are committed by men. In part explains. No, like Clarissa, it explains it all. White people do most of the things, at least in part, because white people are most of the people. And adding this paragraph to the end of the story makes it worse, because it shows that the authors and the editors and the publishers aren't just stupid. They know what explains the data. They know they are race baiting. They know they aren't being honest, but they push it anyway, because they think you and I are too dumb to read the data for ourselves. So in terms of takeaways, 1, don't underestimate a media willingness to mislead you to suit an agenda. But I'm not breaking any ground in warning you of such a thing. More specifically, we should be concerned with their tactic here. What Newsweek is relying on, in this case and many others, is our inability to read data on a per capita basis. Anytime you see a claim that X demographic does Y action the most, take a critical look at how the supporting data are measured. If it's not per capita, if it's not showing you a rate per population, then it's not showing you much of meaning, because other than sex, demographic groups don't break down along even splits. On a very basic level, if you're looking at a claim that says the majority of the population does the majority of a certain action, don't fall for their infinite list of conspiratorial follow-up questions. In that case, the only question that matters is so what? The majority of the population doing the majority of any behavior is exactly what we'd expect. It's not a curiosity, it's not a mystery, and it's not news. It is simple propaganda meant to install a particular worldview in your mind, an ironic one put forth by those of a self-described anti-racist, anti-sexist perspective who only seem to care about demographic crime breakdowns when they work against a particular race and gender for which they have a unique distaste. And they're not even good at hiding it, which is itself good because it means it's easy for us not to let them get away with it. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.